name is Richard Ayres, and I've been a foster carer for the last 8.5 years.
What inspired you to become a foster carer?
It's a bit of a long story. My reason is that I was brought up by my parents. My mother was a child psychologist by trade, although she never practiced. But when she met my father, she used to work in children's homes. And in those days, things were very different in the 60s. There was a lot of biracial children who were living in care homes. And my mum we grew up looking at the photograph albums of when my parents got together, and there was always loads of children in the photographs. And in those days, my mum would take one of the children home with her at the weekend up to my father, where he lived in a police station in Liverpool Street, and they would spend the weekend there. So we always grew up with fantastic stories around all the things my mum did with these children, all the events they went to, all the things they did. And we just had fantastic stories. So it always inspired me to kind of want to do something for children who were like that. My mother's story resonated. There was all these children that in those days it was kind of no one wanted, and that was a horrible thing to say, but it was the truth of the time. And I thought there are lots of children out there who just need a really good home, and I can provide that. And I've done some work in volunteering in prisons for young offenders who are coming out, and I really enjoyed that. And I've had a couple of informal sort of fostering type arrangements with a couple of families whose children I just kind of looked after and did a lot of work with, and I really enjoyed it. So it was a direct link in say, okay, I'm going to do this officially, and I applied to be a foster carer.
Did you know from the get-go that you wanted to foster teenagers, or was that also sort of like a natural progression?
No, I always said I wanted teenagers because that was my experience. I hadn't had my own birth children, and my experience had been with children who were suitable for the foster care system and young offenders and what have you. And my earliest memories are of being a teenager, so I thought I probably understood from my nieces and nephews kind of teenagers better than any. And I enjoyed that work. But when I came into fostering, I was actually given younger children who I think were 7, 8, and 9 at the time, and I've nurtured them through. And two of them are still with me now. They're now 16 and 17.
Were they your first placements?
They were, yes.
Oh, wow, because that was going to be my next question was, do you remember that first placement, like how you felt? Because it's very daunting, isn't it? How
Yeah.
do you remember that?
I was always set up for permanency. I didn't think that I would be able to deal with children coming and going quickly. I thought that would be quite tough for me emotionally because I can get attached quite easily. So I didn't want to do sort of task centered. So mine was always long-term fostering. But while I was waiting for my first placement, I had a couple of children come for weekends and what have you, which was really nice and nice to build a relationship. But I knew they were only coming for a bit of respite at the weekends, and a couple where we've got nowhere to go. Can we just sort of place someone with you? And that was really nice. I enjoyed that, but I always knew that they would be moving to a permanent place within a few days. But the permanency was something I always wanted to do. I wanted to kind of create a family and give some children an opportunity to live within a family environment and a nurturing environment for a long period of time to help them on their road to kind of, to personal growth and educational growth, and hopefully go out into the big wide world and experience life as it should be.
Yeah, and that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about being the support network for these children that don't have that. We were talking about it the other day where we've got children who are 12, 13, 14 that don't have any connections, and it's about them having that person that they can go to,
Mm.
not necessarily a parental figure, but even just someone to send them a birthday present or something like that. You don't actually, when you're not in it, you don't realize that that's as dire as the situation is. So it's about having them connections for them kids. So yeah, it's still extremely valuable, isn't it?
Absolutely. And family contact is also very important for me. With all of the children I've had, I've always maintained good relationships with their birth families, and have actively encouraged and facilitated those collaborations where they're safe to do so, because your birth parents will always be incredibly important to you. And with older children, those connections have already been made. For young children or children who were removed at birth, maybe less so. But for where you've had those relationships already established, it's not up to me as a foster carer to say whether they should or should not be maintaining that contact. Obviously, if it's safe to do so, we need to be nurturing and encouraging that. So a lot of my children don't call me dad. They may refer to me to their friends as dad because it's actually easier in a certain conversation, but they talk about their own parents with me. I speak to their own parents. We talk, we engage, but it's very much a kind of a network that we nurture, and they've all got siblings as well. So we try to maintain the sibling relationships as best we can wherever possible, because they've all spent time together, and those relationships need to be nurtured, because they will be stronger than sometimes you'll have with a foster carer for the rest of your lives. Hopefully my children know I'm not going anywhere and they'll be part of my life for the rest of their lives, but your siblings and your parents, are always going to be naturally part of your life. Very few children disown their parents.
Did maintaining them relationships come quite naturally to you, or was that something that was quite a steep learning curve when you started being a foster carer?
I think the one of the qualities about being a foster carer is not to judge. So my upbringing would be very similar to some children in foster care, but it's also very, very different. I'd probably say I had more of a middle class background than in some areas of my life than others, and some not so much. I suffered some of the same trauma as some of the children will have suffered, the same maybe abuse that some of the children might have. So there's lots of identification, but there's no judgment in it, because I know from my own experiences with my own family, some were really positive, some were really not very positive at all and very negative. But there's no judgment on those, because I do believe that everyone does the best they can with the tools they've got at the time. It's just that some people can't always provide the nurturing environment they need to at that time. But later on in life, people change, and we should all have kind of like forgiveness in our hearts and respect for other people. And it's about not judging people. I don't judge the parents of the children I care for. They did the best that they could do. I'm sure they did with the tools and resources they had at the time. It might have been a bit hard for them. They may have done some things that they regretted, or they may have made some mistakes. These things happen. We all make mistakes. So it wasn't hard for me, because in life I can be like that with everybody. Children make mistakes all the time. We learn from mistakes. That's how we become better people. So we kind of have to embrace that part of our life and not let it hold us back, but use it to kind of move forward and acknowledge that maybe that's not right anymore, and maybe I can think about doing things in a different way, or change some of my thinking and my patterns. Because trauma and birth and young person experiences can be locked in within you and part of your DNA for a very long period of time. Some of the habits you want to change, some of them you don't want to change. And it's not for me to say to a child how they should or shouldn't change. It's about helping them to kind of see what might be better for them as a path they might want to choose.
Obviously, I mentioned earlier that some of the children that are in your care do go to V4C. Is that right? Not the Young Inspectors of V4C.
Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about what that is and the impact that it does have on your children?
Yeah, so my children have, when they were younger, they all went to V4C. I had four of them at the time then, and they loved V4C, Voices for Choices. It was a bit like a youth club with a bit of an agenda. So the agenda was very much to kind of give back a little bit. So you'd spend the first, maybe half an hour of that session talking about, what it's like to be in foster care, maybe parts of the fostering system, helping younger children and older children to understand a bit more about the system and what it's all about. And then it was about having some fun and doing some exercises together, and playing some games and going out on day trips and outings, and building up to kind of voices where they could go to various different events and share with professionals within the social care sector their views and opinions on what it's like to be a looked after child, to help people understand and have more compassion and understanding for what it's like to be a looked after child, what their experiences are. So some great people involved in Voices for Choices, and I advocate anybody, no matter what age, to be involved in it. Try it for a few sessions, see how you get on, because it's a bit of fun. You get some food, you get some days out, you have some outings. It's done in a light-hearted way, but the children get to share their voices and say what it's like for them, and if they want changes. So we used to call the looked after child reviews a child in care review, and the children said we don't like to be called children in care. So they got the language changed, and they say that to the most senior people, and the senior people said, okay, we'll change that language, because the children have told us they don't want that. So it's really important that children do go to Voices for Choices, and they do share their voices, so that they can get across any points they want to, but in a slightly less formal, more friendly environment where they can pass that feedback up the chain. And then maybe one or two of them might want to go to some of these sort of strategic meetings with councillors and lead commissioners and heads of councils and share their views, because they're really, really powerful. The child's voice is incredibly important. There's also the young inspector's voice as well, and one of my children's involved in young inspectors, and They go around and inspect the various different services that the local authorities offer, be that a food retail outlet, be that a local church or a local youth club or a children's home or a fostering home or a supported living service. They'll go and they'll do a review and they'll give feedback on what the service is like through the eyes and the lens of a child. So capturing the voice of children is so important. But these groups also give them a sense of unity. And one of mine has been involved in it for 7 years across V4C and Young Inspectors, and he's really tapped into the network. Everyone in the local authority knows him. They ask him for his views and opinions. He's been filmed for BBC TV News Round, and he's been to the Houses of Parliament. Had lots of opportunities to kind of share his knowledge and experience. And it's really good that he does, because change happens when children speak.
Has there been any other sort of moments that have really stuck out to you throughout your journey in fostering, where you've sort of seen a direct impact of what you do as a foster carer?
I think two of my children came in to me at a very young age. I think they were 7 and 8 at the time, and one of them was 2 years behind academically, and one of them was 4 years behind academically. The first one, within 2 or 3 years, was in the top 25 percentile of her classes, and passed all of her exams, is now doing sixth form and looking to go to university to study criminology. So doing incredibly well, getting fantastic grades. And the other one, who was 4 years behind, he has just passed all of his GCSEs. And he got his English and maths and got passes, and he was 4 years behind. So in 7 years, he made up 4 years of academic study. So yeah, I've seen the work that we've done as a team, because it's not just the foster carer. I mean, we've had tutors, we've had V4C, we've had young inspectors, we've had the social workers, the supporting social workers, EPEPs, his parents have been involved. All of these people have come together to work as a team to drive into him how important his education is. And as a result of that, he worked really, really hard. Still never do, after school study outside of tutors sitting there with him. He's a boy. Boys are generally quite lazy at times, but with all the support we've put around him and this fantastic support at school and the SENCO teams, he managed to pass his English and maths, which are the two most important. He passed other subjects as well, but they're the two most important subjects. So now he's training to be, hopefully, will become a police officer, and he's at college in learning to do public services, without having to do 2 more years of English and maths, which is fantastic. So yeah, the team that the foster carer kind of leads in some respects and draws in all those resources has helped him to make up 4 years in 7. That's outstanding.
Yeah, it is absolutely incredible, isn't it? For any child under any circumstances, that is incredible. So, yeah, it's a credit to the team behind the child, including the foster carer. But I appreciate that you mentioned that it's not just a foster carer.
Absolutely.
There is a team behind a child. So
there is so much support for foster carers, and I think there are certain situations where, as a birth parent, you can be quite on your own. And feel a bit sort of out there trying to figure out how to do things. But with foster care, you pick up the phone to a social worker or a supporting social worker or a learning development person, or the school or the SENCO, V4C, young inspectors. There are so many people. And I had an issue recently coming up, and Katrina from Young Inspectors said, "Oh, I've done this in a previous role. I could bring that forward and do some work with one of your children." I was like, that's fantastic, because trying to tap into those resources, you've always got someone in the network who could say, this would be really good, or here's a training course, or here's a support resource, or have you read this book? I've got another child who's looking to, and she's a mixed heritage, and she's looking to train for law, and she's studying law at college at the moment. And the social worker was able to come to me and say, "There's this book written by this lady, and she went through the very similar experiences as your child. Why don't you give her this book to read?" So she's able to give her that book, and it sat on the side for a few months, and then I casually catch her having a glance and a read of it. But there's always someone there who can give you a bit of a nudge in the right direction, which is fantastic.
Do you think it would be a good idea for empty nesters to consider becoming foster carers for teenagers? Could that be, in terms of they've got a spare bedroom and now there's no child in the home? Do you think that might be a good avenue for some of them?
Absolutely. I think teenagers are kind of the forgotten ones. So when we talk about adoption, we see the young ones being adopted and the older ones, more inclined to be in the fostering system. Exactly what happened with some of my children. The two youngest were adopted and the older ones came to me. And I think with teenagers, they've got a very short space of time, and they need support as much as possible at a very, very important part of their life where they're going through a huge amount of change and development. And I saw my two of my children finish their GCSEs in June, and I saw them over the summer. And one of them was really unsettled because he wasn't at college, he wasn't at school. It's like the rug had been, excuse me, pulled out from underneath his feet, and he didn't know where he was going. And I say to all of my children, when you finish school, you now need to go and get a part-time job, because I don't want children sitting in a room flicking through social media doing nothing all the time. I want them actively working, actually actively in education, and earning their own money, spending their own money, and appreciating what it is, the rewards that hard work gets. And that's what I think teenagers need. They need that support, because if a teenager is left, without that support, then they're likely to go astray. And some of them haven't had a great journey, and giving them that bit of stable security for that few months or a couple of years, just to get them into whatever world they're going to transition into, that be that college, sixth form, university, apprenticeship, or into work, is incredibly important. Because one of my children's 18, is now just living alone, and she says to me, I had no idea it was this difficult. She said, I really should have managed my money better. I really had no idea how expensive everything was. And it's a huge steep learning curve for children. So yeah, it's really, really important that the teenagers have a stable, secure foundation from which to build on, because they grow rapidly and they develop so quickly compared to how I did in my generation. We took a long time to mature. They mature so quickly because these devices, they give them a lot of information. So yeah, they need that stable, supportive environment in which to grow and develop.
Yeah. And if you could offer any piece of advice to someone who's got it in the back of their head of potentially I could be a foster carer, what would it be?
Bit of advice. I would just say do it. So there is a child for every situation. I work full time. Last week I worked 60 hours. The week before I worked 40 hours. When I was working previously, I had a fantastic employer who let me work part time. There is a child or children that suit everybody's situation. I'm a single gay man who lived alone for many, many years, who had spent all his time on his career. And I was then rewarded with three amazing children, and it worked. So there is a huge support network around you. There are children for every situation. It doesn't matter whether you're single, whether you're married, whether you're in a relationship, a partnership, whether you own your own house, you rent your house, whether you've got a job, whether you work away or don't work away. There are children that fit into every environment. So, and even if you've got a situation where you're away for long periods, there's respite. And respite is one of the most valuable things any carer could do, giving foster carers a break sometimes, because some children have got challenging behaviour. Sometimes foster carers need a bit of a break. And it's really great to know there's respite carers out there. So I've not seen a child yet that couldn't be placed with someone in foster care. So I would say do it, go through the process, and there will be children or a child that will suit your situation and circumstances.